gather round, it's time to cheer. Episode 93 is here. OpenAI sails ship, Mesa, what a sight. Gemini 2 shines bright in the starry night. AI agents surf the web, browsing also free.
Hello, and welcome to the Last Week in AI podcast, where you can hear us chat about what's going on with AI. As usual, in this episode, we will be summarizing and discussing some of last week's most interesting AI news. And as always, you can also go to lastweekin.ai for our text newsletter, and you will also find the links to all these stories there and in a description of this episode. I am one of your hosts, as always, Andrei Kurenkov. My background is of having studied AI in grad school and now being at an AI startup.
And I'm your other host, Jeremy Harris. Obviously, Gladstone AI, we've talked about that a bunch of times. You know who I am, hopefully. What you may not know is that I just moved. And so you're going to hear some echoes. Unfortunately, on my end, I wasn't able to find a room that doesn't have intense echo. And my newborn daughter is being taken care of by my saintly wife in the next room and downstairs. So I just wanted to get out of the way. But that does mean that unfortunately for this week, you got to put up with an echo, and you got to put up with the fact that I don't have curtains in this room. So if you're watching this on YouTube, that is why my face is just inundated, bathed in the sun's sweet, sweet rays. And that is my intro.
Yeah, we're doing what we can with the life circumstances we're given, and it'll be an interesting opportunity to test out the latest in AI audio enhancement. Adobe, we didn't cover this, but Adobe did release a new iteration of their audio podcast tool to take noisy audio and make it nice sounding. So, you never know. Maybe there's going to be no echo if it actually works really well.
Yeah, that's right. Hopefully people are listening to this and being like, wait, what are they even talking about? And we'll, of course, use our AI-powered content improvement as well, which will completely replace every word that I say with something actually insightful. So
yeah, exactly. People give us good reviews and they don't know that it really is mostly the AI doing the work. It's not us.
Well, Andre, as a large language model trained by OpenAI, I can't respond to that comment in a direct way. But I will tell you not to bury dead bodies or make bombs at home. So,
I mean, that's what you got to do, if nothing else, right? All right, well, let's do a quick preview of what we'll be talking about in this episode. We have some major stories on the tools and applications front. It's been a big week at OpenAI, releasing Sora and a bunch of other stuff. And Google also has Gemini 2.0, some agent announcements, big stuff. And then moving out to applications and business, as always, some exciting developments at OpenAI and a bunch of stuff going on with data centers, as has been the story of the past, 6 months or so, or maybe an entire year. Research and advancements, we have some pretty cool new ideas going on in reasoning and in memory. It'll be interesting if you like the technical side. And then policy and safety, we have some new developments on the Trump administration. And as always, a bit of stuff on the US-China relationship and a bit of a mix of stuff in general. But before we get there, our usual prelude, I do want to do a quick shout out to some feedback we've gotten. Some interesting new reviews on Apple Podcasts. There was the most recent one. I'm betting you haven't seen this, Jeremy. The title is What a Great Find. And then, funny story, my wife, a CPA, and this listener just listened to your podcast for 22 hours, broken up into 2 days while driving out and back to Indiana for Thanksgiving. So that's impressive. I mean, I guess if you really want to know what happened in the past year of AI developments, that will do it. I don't know if I could listen to 22 hours of us over the course of 2 days, but we were honored, I guess. And then just one more I want to shout out. There's another cool review, mentions that this reviewer is on the industry side and has used machine learning for a long time in the non-IT sector and has actually read some of the papers that has been covered here on the podcast, which is cool. I don't know how many people listening are more technical and do find the papers interesting or go on to read them. But I guess that is one of the things we like to cover. And this does have an interesting question we can maybe chat about a little bit. This viewer says that they don't quite believe in sort of AI doom scenarios, but do like to hear about the developments. And there's a question here on if erring on the side of caution can lead to negative outcomes. How, for instance, Greenpeace and anti-GMO groups opposed golden rice, and that caused to a bunch of negative outcomes after that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's just a good question, just a good point. History is full of examples of things in both these directions, and for many different reasons, right? Like one thing you can do is pull the fire alarm too early, for example, and stifle a field just when it's at its inception, right? That would be a big problem. And certainly we've seen like the enormous benefits from things like open source in AI and historically in software in general. You want to think very, very hard about how you do that. And then there's also just like, if you're concerned about AI to the point where, you're like, I think the US government, Department of Defense, whatever, the intelligence community should not be accessing these tools, then there's, we have adversaries who are going to do this. And so it's a very complex space. It's difficult to know what to do. There's also examples of the kind of flip side of this, right? So, for example, a traditional one is nuclear weapons, where, you think back to the kind of late 30s, early 40s even, and a lot of nuclear research that was deeply and profoundly relevant to the weaponization of nuclear technology was out in the open. And in fact, there was a very public argument that you should not lock things down. In fact, the space continued as a field of open research. Some have argued long sort of after it should have been locked down. So it's sort of figuring out what the right analog is historically for AI is really hard. It depends on how seriously you take, the risk of Chinese exfiltration of powerful models, the risk that the models can be weaponized with catastrophic impact, the risk that the models may autonomously have catastrophic effects. All this stuff, feeds into everybody's perspectives on this. And then there's a whole bunch of like, the future is just hard to predict stuff going on here too. So no, I think it's just a good question. And I wish I had all the answers. I don't think anyone really does. I think the key is you got to keep all these things in your head at the same time.
Exactly. And I guess worth also mentioning, I forget where this comment was posted, but someone did post kind of mentioning that we could be a little more, providing a little bit more of an international perspective. I think it's pretty clear that we are covering this from the, let's say, Western US, Canada perspective, and often do portray China gaining advanced AI capabilities as not necessarily what we want. So calling it out, we do kind of have some opinion on that front. We try to both objectively cover the news and give our take, which typically is, especially for Jeremy, I think, on the concern about China front. So,
on that note, I think just like to share and be open about my perspective on this, and you can factor it in any way you want, right? That's the beauty of the podcasting scene. But I think the world is much better off. Personally, this is just my view, with the United States well ahead on the AI side of things. I think the CCP is, in my opinion, a very dangerous force in the world, and we need to find ways to counter, especially their use of advanced AI for military and other applications. And I think that they're highly competent at things like exfiltration. And anyway, this is all, it quickly devolves into like how you view different powers in the world. And I do think there are very objective reasons for thinking that the CCP is not the best friend of the Chinese people, and certainly not the best friend of the West. And that's that's a stance that I tend to take. You can factor in your own priors however you like, but I think that's at the end of the day gotta be.
And I think we do want to be careful when we do portray China as maybe not necessarily a positive force that is very much about the CCP, right? Because certainly being in grad school, I know many people from China, a lot of research comes out of China. This is not about people who are Chinese. It's about the government and what may happen if they utilize AI in, let's say, nefarious ways. Alrighty, and then just one more thing before we get to news. As usual, we do need to shout out our sponsor, and has been the case for a little while now. The sponsor for this week is The Generator, which is the interdisciplinary AI lab focused on entrepreneurial AI at Babson College, which is a #1 school for entrepreneurship for over 30 consecutive years in the US. And what happened was last year, various professors in Babson partnered with students to launch this new interdisciplinary lab that does various things like focusing on AI entrepreneurship and business innovation, AI ethics and society, the future of work and talent, AI arts and performance, and other things. So they look into a lot of sort of emerging trends. They train the faculty of Babson to be aware of AI concepts and AI tools, which I suppose if you're an entrepreneur, you certainly want to be on the cutting edge of using at least ChatGPT, Perplexity, the tools that make you more productive. So once again, shout out to them and thank you for your sponsorship. All right, and getting into the tools and apps, the first story is what I would say is probably the big story of the week, which is the launch of Sora. So Sora, the text-to-video AI model from OpenAI, first kind of teased at the beginning of 2024. I think one of the big kind of starter events for AI in this year. Well, it took a while, but now you actually can access it and can use it as a tool. Assuming that the website is up, actually, it was so popular that ChatGPT went down, which was a little bit annoying as someone who uses their API. So this is a pretty full-featured kind of consumer product is what turned out to happen. There's a website you can go to, and then there's quite a bit of user interface to it. So there is the basic of you give it text and you generate a video, but they have a more advanced kind of tool set of being able to have a timeline of videos. And in addition to that, they also have an explore page with community-generated videos and a lot of the ability to browse what various people have made. And as we would sort of kind of expect, videos look really nice. I don't know that they look, let's say, like Sora 2.0. If you look back on the beginning of the year and look to now, it's not a leap. Like you still... It's like similar, I would say, to what we've been seeing with text to video, and you still see a lot of those common artifacts. So as a portrayal of an AI world model, it's certainly not the case that Sora has kind of solved the world model problem of not having weird hallucinations happen when you get into gymnastics or other tricky things like that. But it is pretty impressive, of course.
Yeah, and we're getting a couple of insights from the system card that was published in terms of what the model actually consists of. It is a diffusion model, so that's good to know. So you start off with a base video that's a bunch of noise, and you gradually remove that noise over many steps, right? That's the diffusion concept, go from noise to information. And that's kind of the training process. What they say is that they give the model foresight into like many frames at a time. So the model is not just looking at one frame and then trying to kind of do diffusion just based on that still image and ensure consistency with another. What they're doing is they're giving it many frames at the same time, which allows the model to do things like capture object permanence, right? This idea that if you take an object, you move it out of sight and then you move it back in, you want the model to retain a sense that, hey, that object still exists, right? So it's not just going to like vorp out of space. For a classic example is, you look at say a painting on a wall, then you move the camera's perspective a little bit off the wall, you don't see the painting anymore. And then when you move it back to the wall, the painting's gone, right? That's a lack of object permanence. That's typical of these sorts of models. They're trying to deal with this by, again, training the model to see many, many different frames at the same time so that it can learn this idea of object permanence, among other things that improve coherence. We do know that it's a transformer. So that's been done presumably for the sort of scaling properties of transformers. Certainly OpenAI seems keen on applying this standard scaling recipe and strategy to Sora. So we'll probably keep seeing more versions of Sora. And we do know from their blog post that it uses the recaptioning technique from DALL-E 3. So they describe this as generating highly descriptive captions for the visual training data. Basically, imagine you have an image, generate like a very, very long caption that in great detail captures what's in there in order to allow your model to develop more of a sort of conceptual semantic understanding of what is contained in a richer way in that image. We know that they're using space-time patches. We talked about the idea of space-time patches previously, right? This idea that you've got essentially like a cube. So if you look at a still image, right, you can cut out a little square from it. But then that still image, if it's in a video, there's going to be another still image before and after and a whole bunch stacked like that. So you can imagine taking a little patch of that image and extending it in the time domain. And now you have kind of a space-time chunk. And they're going to use those as, or they call them patches. But essentially, they're going to transform the videos into compressed latent representation from which they can pull these space-time patches. So that's basically the architectural details that we currently have. It's pretty hand-wavy at the moment. It does make me think a little bit, and we talked about this back in the day. I think it was VJEPA that Meta came out with, and they were a little bit more open about, obviously, their architecture there because they tend to do open source stuff. But that is what we know so far. So emphasis on scaling presumably continues with this. And there's a whole bunch of information about the red teaming process, as you might imagine, right? Some concern over, in particular, how this kind of tool could be used for persuasion, right? Generating, fake news or whatever, any kind of persuasive content. And they do flag that as a thing that, their reviews suggest is a risk with this. Obviously, not surprising. But they do also say, there's no evidence that it poses risk with respect to the kind of the rest of the OpenAI preparedness evals. So cybersecurity, chem, biological, radiological, nuclear risk, model autonomy, just as you'd expect, right? You're not going to have a video generation model that poses a cybersecurity risk. Fair enough. But they do flag that, you could look at things like impersonation, misinformation, or social engineering. And they have a bunch of red teaming activities they talk about. They brought folks in to do they claim 15,000 generations between September and December 2024. So this also is a bit of a more robust evaluation process, or at least in time it seems to have been, than, for example, what we saw with the release of O1 Preview and O1 Mini a couple months ago, when OpenAI was criticized for essentially tossing the model at eval companies like Meter and saying, "Hey, you got like a week to do all your evals," and anyway, all the problems that come from that. So here it seems to have been a much more sort of patient process. Again, 15,000 generations. It's hard for me to evaluate like what that really means. Is that enough? Is that too much? But it seems like they've at least paid attention to this, as they do with their other models, and the report is kind of interesting there too.
Right, and they do highlight on that safety front that you'll get watermarks if you're not on the pro tier. So talking about the subscription side, ChatGPT Plus subscribers at $20 per month tier can generate up to 50 priority videos and up to 720p resolution with 5 second duration. And then in the new ChatGPT Pro tier of $200 per month, you can generate up to 500 priority videos and up to HD resolution, 20 seconds duration, 5 concurrent generations. And you can download it without a watermark. So this is an example, I think, where that $200 per month subscription tier actually gets you quite a bit if you care about generating lots of videos. And in addition to a watermark that some videos will have, they also do have the metadata of C2A, of the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, which has some of these things that AI outputs increasingly have to be able to verify whether it's AI or not. In addition to the usual text to image, they do have some of the other kinds of capabilities with, for instance, remixing, changing a video based on some prompt. And it can take about up to 1 minute to generate. So it's not quite real time, takes a bit longer than a lot of what we've seen, but it is relatively fast. They did say that there's a new Sora Turbo model powering this, that is presumably much faster than what they had at the beginning of the year. So overall, quite the rollout for Sora. I think I was surprised by the degree to which they had a pretty sophisticated tool with the storyboards, with a whole other UI, website, subscription tiers, a lot of stuff going on here. And if you're in the US, if you're in a lot of countries, you can now go ahead and try it out. Except if you're in the UK and EU, it seems that isn't the case. Sam Altman said it may take a while to launch there. So speaking of the negatives of taking AI safety seriously, I mean, where you go, you're not going to get a lot of stuff in Europe at the same time as in the US.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that too is just that the EU AI legal domain is like, it's not the fact that they're taking AI safety seriously. I think it's the fact that they are a bloated European, government organization that, like, GDPR was the same, right? There are much better ways to deal with your sort of like ad problem than having pop-ups, your privacy problems and having pop-ups every time you visit a goddamn website. So yeah, I mean, I think this is a lesson in be careful about how you expand government, because no Sora for you.
And moving on to, I would say, the other big story of a week coming from Google. They have revealed Gemini 2 and a bunch of associated stuff related to Gemini 2. So starting with Gemini 2, they have Gemini 2.0 Flash, which is a successor to 1.5 Flash. And I mean, the benchmarks here are pretty surprising. They say that it can outperform Gemini 1.5 Pro on various benchmarks and is twice as fast. It supports multimodal inputs like images, video, and audio, and it now supports multimodal output like images and then mixing that with text and text-to-speech audio. Although I'm not sure if that's launched as a capability yet, it is built into Gemini 2 Flash. It also has tool use like Google Search and code execution. And then in addition to all of this, by the way, Gemini 2 is already available. So it's not one of these announcements where it's not going to come for a while. You can access the chat optimized version of 2.0 Flash experimental in the Gemini app. You can select it as a model. And they do say that they are going to go to agents with Gemini 2.0. They have this whole kind of little demonstration where there's an update to Project Astra that is their sort of prototype with a universal AI assistant. And they have Project Mariner, which is an AI agent for controlling your browser. And also another thing, Drools, an AI-powered code agent that can help developers. So a lot of stuff going on here, but I think Gemini 2 Flash, the main thing was, I think, pretty cool. Sounds pretty impressive, at least according to the benchmarks.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of a bit of a reverse OpenAI play, where often when Google has a big event coming up, OpenAI will try to scoop them the day before, do a big launch. And everybody's talking about the OpenAI launch, the Google thing. This is a little bit, in a sense, sort of the script being flipped, where you have OpenAI in the middle of their 12 days of shipness and launching a whole bunch of stuff, including Sora, which you just talked about, and now Google coming out with this pretty interesting development. I got to say, I mean, this is we first started looking at companies that were heading in this direction, i.e., the agentic tool use and tool use on behalf of users direction. With Adept AI was sort of the first time there was a significant investment in this direction. Obviously, we talked about how they were maybe too small to succeed, and then ultimately ended up getting sold depending on who you ask for parts. And here's Google actually kind of with a big push in this direction. Reminds you a lot of Anthropic and their efforts that are quite similar actually. And now you're going to start to see the base models as well being trained with agentic potential in mind, right? That's really what this is. You're no longer viewing these as just chatbots. Really, the training the training regime, the synthetic data, the way you approach PPO, the way you approach fine tuning is entirely going to be geared increasingly towards agentic potential. And that's, I think, what you're starting to see here. They started these training runs thinking about how are these models going to serve as agents. And it does seem, based on the demos they discuss in at least this announcement, there's some pretty impressive stuff, right? Always hard to know from demos how generalizable they'll be. So Project Mariner is this experimental Chrome extension they have, right? That's able to take over your web browser and do supposedly useful chores. And they report on, Wired does here on a particular example. They say that they had an agent that was asked to plan a meal, and it goes to the supermarket Sainsbury. If you're not in the UK, then that's going to be a weird chain for you. But there you go. They go to UK Trader Joe's. They log in to user's account, add relevant items to their shopping basket. When certain items were unavailable, the model chose suitable replacements based on its own knowledge about cooking, right? World models coming in handy here. And the last sentence, though, of course, as ever, is fairly indicative. Google declined to perform other tasks, suggesting it remains a work in progress. So, again, very fragile demos is definitely a thing. So you want to be a little careful when evaluating these things. But just to give you a sense of at least the strategic direction they're heading in, they're saying this is a research prototype at the moment, right? It's not meant to be the leading product line, but this is really where things are going, right? Like it is Sonnet 3.5 new. It is Gemini 2 sort of Project Mariner agents. This is where we're going. Certainly into 2025, we may be starting to see stuff like that. In the next, I guess, never mind, in the next 2 weeks. No, it's going to be, really a 2025 story. But I think things are going to move really fast. There are a number of reasons why I think agents are really poised to make breakthroughs. A lot of interesting scaling results and things like that. We'll talk about in the research section, one big paper in particular. But I think this is a harbinger of really big things to come.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think agents, to a large extent, are more of an engineering challenge now than a conceptual research problem. And this could be a very kind of important thing for Google, because we've seen they haven't quite been able to overtake OpenAI and Anthropic in the race to have the best models, the best frontier models. In fact, we've talked about this, I think, a couple episodes ago. When you use Gemini as a user of Claude or ChatGPT, as I am at least, it tends to be a little disappointing in terms of its reasoning techniques and just its overall intelligence. Hopefully, Gemini 2.0 helps with that. But if Google is able to augment AI assistant, its AI assistant that is built into the Android phones, right? They have a big leg up, as you always say, Jeremy. Distribution is key. So everyone is fighting to get an agent in your hand that will be sort of your personal assistant. And Google has phones and browsers that people use that if they have a good enough version, people will just probably default to using those agents, which agents. I think we are on the side of the predictions that most people will be using AI agents as an everyday thing not too long from now. So very important initiative for Google. All right, and a couple more big things, although we'll try to start going a bit faster. We've spoken at length about these last two. The next one is another development from the ship mess, as they've been calling it at OpenAI. So they have a bunch of news stories. We'll cover at least a few of them. The next one we are covering is the ChatGPT advanced voice mode, adding video and screen sharing input. So we saw this originally in the demos that went back, I think, to May, where when you were talking to ChatGPT live, you could also show it a stream of video, show it some equations, ask it about those equations, and it could give you the answer. That was not part of the launch of advanced voice mode, and now it is. Now you can do that thing they demoed back originally. In addition to that, they also added a fun little Santa mode, which has a new voice option and a snow globe themed interface. So they are shipping a lot and shipping kind of various levels of excitement. I think this is a fairly big deal, but certainly not like Sora level.
Yeah, I mean, especially on the sort of application side, I won't pretend to like know anyone at OpenAI working on like just the applications and product side, but my guess is that the advanced voice mode rollout being so delayed, right? That was a big theme people were kind of getting frustrated about. It sort of reminds me a little bit of this Gemma 2 thing with the very fragile demos. The edge cases can sometimes take a long time to iron out. There's a long tail of stuff anytime, especially when you launch in a new modality, right? Because then you've got to create new evals, you got to create new tests, new red teaming protocols that aren't necessarily constrained to the kinds of evals you might run on a text-based system, which is what OpenAI had been optimizing so hard for before. So yeah, anyway, I think this will have been a new challenge for them. And presumably, like my guess is it'll take less time for subsequent rollouts of Sora for that reason, because they'll already have that base of expertise built out.
Next up, a story from Microsoft. It seems everyone is competing to get a story like this recently, and they also have a story regarding sort of agentic capability. Microsoft's Copilot will be able to browse the web with you using AI vision. So they are trying to add this to their Edge browser. This is in testing. And so this feature, Copilot Vision, users can enable it to ask questions about the text, images, and content they are viewing to help you out. Seems not quite as agentic. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be able to sort of take a request and go to websites on your behalf to do things. This is also currently in limited testing, available only to Copilot Pro subscribers through the Copilot Labs program. But another example, Google is doing agentic stuff for their browser, and Microsoft is definitely going to go in that direction. And this is an early preview of that.
Yeah, and this is another instance of the case of OpenAI or Microsoft starting to kind of not distance itself from OpenAI, but certainly assert its independence in a more full-throated way. Like we have products that directly compete with OpenAI's products. They want that because from everything I've heard, I mean, the Sam Altman board debacle really rocked that relationship quite badly. And at this point, that's part of the context that Microsoft is keeping in mind as they ensure that they're not, there's an antitrust piece too, but they're also really keen on ensuring that they have their own internal capability. And that's going to be part of what this is. Again, distribution is king, and Microsoft certainly has that through Copilot. So it will be interesting to see the uptake on this one.
Couple more stories, starting now with X, previously Twitter, and they have launched a Grok image generation model. So this is now initially available to select users. They say it will be rolled out globally within a week. And it's an image generation model. It can generate high quality images from text or other images. It was codenamed Aurora. And we don't know too much about it, of course, but interesting that they are training to me. I guess OpenAI has DALL-E, and presumably other companies have their image generation models. Grok initially allowed you to generate with Black Forest Labs or Flux. Now they have this model that is presumably in-house.
Yeah, this is also kind of interesting. Yeah, the Black Forest Labs piece, I have no idea what they're thinking now, because a lot of I think we talked about their big fundraise, I believe, last week. That kind of, I think they're pushing $1 billion now. So, those sorts of valuations are dependent on presumably an ongoing relationship with X. And to the extent that Grok takes that over with their own native image generation stuff, I mean, that's a structural problem for Black Forest Labs. Like, I don't know how they recover from that. It's like as things, take off, and especially you'll start to see interactions, right, between, Grok 3, Grok 4, and the image generation functionality. There's all kinds of reasons why that's the case, from, annotations of images, like highly descriptive captions, things like that, just the world model picture. Eventually, multimodality is best done in one ecosystem at scale. And so, you're less likely to want to farm out individual use cases, individual modes like vision to sort of partners. So curious about what that implies for that relationship for sure. The blog post itself, not a whole ton of information, right? Like, despite the X being oriented towards this open source approach. This is definitely more of a closed source sort of announcement. We don't have code. We don't have architecture information. We're just sort of waiting, and apparently, really good at photorealistic rendering, right? And precisely following text instructions. Well, that's pretty consistent with what we've seen from other products so far, but interesting that it'll be native to X for sure.
Right. And again, we don't know too much about it. It could be built on Flux, but they do claim that this is trained seemingly on their own. So yeah, impressive. Another impressive thing to have shared from XAI, given that they're sort of in catch-up mode. Next up, Cognition Labs, a startup. They kind of made a splash with a demo of Devin, a software engineer, as they called it. And it has now launched quite a while, a few months at least since they initially previewed it. And you can use it if you're a subscriber. So you have to pay $500 per month for individuals and engineering teams. There is an integrated development environment extension, an API, also an onboarding session, and various things like that. So yeah, another piece of the agentic story here, where we've had AI code writing assistants for a long time. I think they have been integrated pretty deeply into a lot of programmers' workflows. I know for me, that's definitely the case. And now there is the race to make software engineering agents that can do even more on the software front.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, Devin was released a long time ago, right? It's like 8 months ago, back in March. And at the time, there were all these impressive demos that were claims and counterclaims about whether this is hype or not. It kind of seemed like it might have been a fairly frail model in the sense that it could do this idea, it could do the demos, but could it actually perform for practical tasks? The claim now is that this version, at least of Devin, is really good when users give it tasks they know how to do themselves, and also teaching the model to test its work, keeping sessions under 3 hours, breaking down large tasks. Basically, it's all the stuff that you typically, if you use these sorts of tools, whether it's Copilot or something else in your development, like this is all standard stuff. So it does seem like one of those things. I'm curious to hear the side by side. If you're going to defend that $500 a month price point, like that's asking a lot. So you're up against OpenAI O1, $200 a month for the highest paid tier or the most expensive tier of O1. So is this really going to be 2.5 times better for this use case? I think that's a really interesting question, and we'll find out soon. Because I think when it comes to Devin and Cognition Labs in general, I think they've got an uphill battle. I'm going to say the same thing that I say about them, about Cohere, about Adept AI, all these mesoscopic companies that haven't raised a ton. The reality is scaling is still working. I know there's a whole bunch of naysaying about scaling these days, but when you actually look at what's going on, it is still working. This is why companies are pumping in billions into new data center builds, like tens of billions. So I think companies like Cognition are actually going to be in deep trouble if the scaling trends do continue. And so my naive expectation is that they end up folding sometime in the next 2 to 3 years. And we'll see. Hopefully they prove me wrong. And then this is kind of part of a problem in the space, right? Like the rich get richer in that sense. You have the big players that can afford the big data centers that build the better models. But I think this is it's a pretty interesting moment. I almost want to say do or die, because they either rock OpenAI's O1 and similar models like Claude 3.5 Sonnet New, which is probably the most direct competition here, or they don't. And you're defending $500 a month. That is a steep price point.
And I don't know actually if they claim to be training their own models. I think this is an example also where the user experience piece is increasingly important if you're competing in a space. So they have the ability to use it in a browser. They have integrations for your IDE. You can use it via Shell. And a lot of the time, it's also a part of, if you kind of adopt a tool and you get to know the tool, you might just stick with it, right? And you don't need sort of to train the model necessarily. You can use Llama, you can use another API. You just need people to stick with you. And that's currently kind of a war going on with Cursor and a lot of these startups doing tools for just software engineering with built-in stuff. So I don't know, maybe,
yeah, that's a good point. Sorry, you're right. My mind was absolutely going to that idea. You're right, as a platform / integrator, I guess that's good. Without information about specifically how it works under the hood, it's just you risk all the standard things where you're going up against the big players with distribution, and getting swallowed whole as well by the UX and UI of OpenAI, of Claude. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, that's a distinct set of risks.
And to your point of comparison, it's gonna just looking at their blog right now, they did post a review of OpenAI 01 and talking about coding agents. So there's a bit of worry there, I think, with all this work on the agents from a whole bunch of people. All right, even more stories on news. We just got a couple more. The next one is part of the ship mess trend at OpenAI, but also some more. This one is about Apple, and they have launched iOS 18.2. Part of that was the new ChatGPT integration with Siri. So at long last, you can do that. Users do not need an OpenAI account to use the integration, but you can opt for upgraded ChatGPT versions through Apple. And there are apparently also privacy protections where OpenAI does not store requests. In addition to that integration, you also get some things like Genmoji, better text tools, and a variety of features that we've seen with Apple Intelligence. So nice to see this coming here. It took a bit longer maybe than people expected, at least I expected, but certainly important for Siri to stay viable.
Yeah, and with that, OpenAI is now partnering, interestingly, with both Microsoft and Apple at very large scale, which is highly unusual, right? Like these are normally, like the Apple-Microsoft rivalry is one of the longest standing ones in modern Silicon Valley history. So, this is quite a feat by Sam A, being able to Machiavelli his way into the close relationship with both these companies. The other thing, too, is Apple is known to be building their own internal language models. Their hope is really to do a lot more of this internally. And so it'll be interesting, from a data standpoint. I don't remember the details of the data flow in this exchange, right? Like what data stays on Apple Store. I mean, I've heard the claim that, the user data stays on Apple hardware and doesn't touch OpenAI hardware. I forget how that's implemented exactly, but that'll be a central concern here and a brand reason for Apple to take this in-house and have their own LLMs as much as possible, serving up chatbots. But for now, it seems like I don't know what to call this, like an alliance of convenience for the moment for these two big players.
And the way this works, if you are a user of Siri, this should just kick in if you ask Siri a complicated question that it cannot handle. It will then ask you whether you will ask the user for permission to access ChatGPT to answer the question. So perhaps you'll start seeing it if you give Siri tricky questions. And on to the last story. This one is about Reddit. They have a new AI search tool. So this is called Reddit Answers, and it is what it sounds like. You can ask this tool a question. It will look through Reddit, presumably, and provide you an answer, which would mean that instead of Googling for what people are saying on Reddit, maybe you will actually go to Reddit and ask this thing what people on Reddit are saying with respect to various things. Still initially available to a limited number of users in the US and in English, but it will presumably soon expand to more languages and to Android and other things like that.
Yeah, this is actually part of a really interesting battle or subplot, let's say, that's playing out in the search space. So Reddit, and I don't know if you found this over the last sort of 2 years, I found myself increasingly Googling to find subreddits. Like basically, the real answers I want are on some, machine learning subreddit, right? Or some, I don't know, some what's other stuff that I do? I don't do a lot of stuff, but basically things like that. And so you're functionally using Google just as a way of getting into Reddit, which is a sign that, Google's in a bit of trouble, right? If that's what they're leaning on, if you're finding yourself more and more drawn towards a certain platform, admittedly for some use cases. But it makes it very tempting for Reddit to just say, hey, you know what? We'll just make it a lot easier to kind of use the AI augmented tool set, have summarizers, have search products and things like that natively. At the same time, Google is playing with, right, this whole idea of summarizing websites rather than just serving up websites, which is a threat to websites like Reddit because, hey, maybe you don't have to click through. Maybe you don't have to actually, give them your eyeballs. You can just give those eyeballs to Google entirely. And so this is all kind of part of the landscape shifting underneath mostly Google's feet. And I think this is a structural risk for Google in the long term, certainly. Search is going to change. We just don't know exactly how. We don't know what the form factor of the final product will be. But another instance of that trend here, yeah.
And they gave one example at least in this article, tips for flying with a baby for the first time, which is the kind of thing you might ask for on Reddit. And it gives you a well-formatted response with built-in links to the original discussion. So in a way, quite similar to the overall trend with AI search, where, it looks up a bunch of articles, or in this case, Reddit conversations, summarizes for you in a new AI-generated kind of answer that combines all that information and provides you the links to go back to the original source of that. So, I totally agree. I think often people do use Google to find discussions of stuff they are thinking about on Reddit, and perhaps this will start to change that. We'll see. All right, that's it for tools and applications. Quite a lot this last week. Moving on to applications and business. And the first story is once again about OpenAI. The summary is OpenAI is aiming to eliminate the Microsoft AGI rule to boost future investment. So this is like reportedly, according to people inside, not anything official here. There is a rule that prevents Microsoft from accessing future AGI technology. So that was put in place long ago. That would kind of mean that I think essentially OpenAI would have control once you get to what they deem AGI. Commercial partners won't necessarily be able to get access to that. This was back from the days when it was a nonprofit. Well, now it's trying to go for profit, and various things are changing. Potentially, this would be one of those things.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting, right? Just because of the way OpenAI originally framed this carve-out, right? When there was this first big Microsoft investment, the $10 billion, actually, sorry, that was before that. It was around like $1 billion they put in. The claim was made, well, look, now you have all these lofty goals about ensuring the benefits of AI are shared with everyone, and you build it safely. You're going to actually invest in things like super alignment. And now you're partnering with Microsoft in a way that gives them access to your IP. So like, what value are your guarantees of how you're going to treat the technology if you're attached to the hip to somebody who is not bound by those constraints? And the response there was, oh, okay, well, don't worry. We have this clause in our agreement, as you said, that prevents Microsoft from accessing AGI. They can access anything else, right? That's part of the agreement. But once we reach AGI, which they define internally as, quote, highly autonomous systems that outperform humans at most economically valuable work, then Microsoft won't be able to access that tech. Now, you may be asking yourself, highly autonomous system that outperforms humans at most economically valuable work, that sounds very fuzzy. Surely somebody has to determine what that means and when we've crossed that threshold. And the answer is yes, the OpenAI board, the board of the nonprofit, was to determine when that threshold was achieved, and therefore when Microsoft's access to OpenAI's technology would get cut off right now. The problem is if you're asking Microsoft and other big players to come in and invest giant wads of cash to fuel your continued scaling, you really have no choice but to say, okay, open kimono, you're going to be able to use all this tech. That's a big issue, right? That's a big issue for OpenAI. On their website right now, it says, quote, AGI is explicitly carved out of all commercial and IP licensing agreements. This was explicitly done to prevent the kind of people who were less security, safety conscious, whatever OpenAI would say currently that it is, from accessing the technology. And now they're rolling that back, right? So this actually, I think, would rightfully be viewed as a lot of like early OpenAI cheerleaders as a direct kind of contravention of their earlier principles, a sacrificing of principle for the ability to continue to scale, which is a requirement. Like, look, we're in a scaling race. OpenAI has no choice. They need to be able to bring in fresh capital because the CapEx requirements of scaling are so insane. But here's Sam Altman explaining that at a New York Times conference just this past Wednesday. He said, quote, when we started, you have to imagine I'm speaking with verbal fry here. When we started, we had no idea we were going to be a product company or that the capital we needed would turn out to be so huge. If we knew those things, we would have picked a different structure. And that's all very interesting because it ties back. I've been hearing tons of stuff from friends at OpenAI, some folks even who've worked in let's say Sam's orbit, that his view is that like, the problem was that the corporate structure, it was all wrong to begin with. And the fundamental challenge he will face if he tries to make that argument to himself and to others is that the principles themselves, the principles that underpinned OpenAI's activity, these lofty ideals of safety and security and all this stuff, those are, by OpenAI's own arguments back then, betrayed by this action. That's what at least it seems like to, I think, a lot of people. I think there's a pretty strong argument there. There's an argument out of necessity, though, that seems to be trumping everything, which is just like, yeah, well, if we want to have any role in this brave new world, we have to be able to scale. That means we have to be able to go for profit. We have to be able to ditch clauses like this. But I think this is really, really tricky, especially, you think about the whole transition from nonprofit to for-profit. OpenAI right now, and Sam Altman in particular's word, starting to look pretty unreliable. Like it's honestly difficult to think of things that OpenAI committed to back in the day that they still are like really sticking to. We've seen failures on the complete catastrophic failure to fund super alignment, and people literally like 3 rounds of successive super alignment leadership, just ditching the company.
And the promise was 20% of resources will go to safety, right? Which reportedly hasn't been the case. And that was part of a frustration, presumably internally.
Exactly. And ambiguity there too about, was it 20% of the compute stockpile they'd acquired up to that point, 20% going forward, all these things. And you could argue that ambiguity, by the way, was a feature and not a bug, in that it made it easier to kind of claim that they were adherent. But even by any reasonable standard, it seems that they just flopped on that. And in many such cases, like many such cases, of which this seems to be just yet another example. So I don't know what the interaction will be. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what the interaction here will be with the nonprofit to for-profit changeover. But man, is the list getting long now with OpenAI?
And I wouldn't be surprised if this move is something Microsoft really wants before they are willing to pump more money in. As you said, the question of what is AGI and what isn't is pretty nebulous. And so if you're Microsoft, you'd be like, well, I don't know. You can call something AGI even if we disagree, right? Some people might argue O1 is already AGI. Someone, I think with an OpenAI posted basically saying that, which, that's not good. If you could just say like, oh, this is a thing you want to get access to because we think it's AGI. So certainly from a business perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And on to the second story, something we haven't touched on in a little while, but personally I think is a bit of a big deal. The story is that GM has halted funding of robo-taxi development by Cruise, ending kind of a long, ongoing tragedy, you could say, that they've been covering for a while now.
So slow motion car crash, one might say. Sorry, I'll see myself.
Yes. So what happened, just quick recap, Cruise had a major incident over a year ago now, I believe, where they were partially at fault, let's say, for an injury someone sustained. There was a car crash due to a human driver, but then the cruise car pulled over in a way that hurt someone. And the big problem was the cruise communications with regulators was, let's say, dodgy. They didn't fully disclose everything. They weren't fully cooperative. That led to a bunch of issues. Cruise was at that point testing on San Francisco streets, just like Waymo was. That ended. We've seen kind of a slow movement towards getting back into the game from Cruise, but it's always been a question of whether they will try to compete with Waymo and increasingly Tesla. And now they are pretty much bowing out. It's pretty clear that GM is planning to acquire the remaining Cruise shares and will then kind of fold it in, presumably to use that technology in their cars. So, now it's pretty much two big players, it seems. Basically, Waymo and Tesla are the two providers potentially of self-driving robotaxis. Waymo increasingly rolling out throughout the US, but somewhat slowly. Tesla increasingly improving their FSD software. Recently, they launched FSD 13, which is at this point looking pretty impressive. Much less sort of scary to let it take over and drive you around, much more human-like, they say, because of the end-to-end training from data going just from video. So one of these things that right now might go under the radar, but in a year, I do foresee a lot of robotaxis being everywhere, and it's a really big business that either Waymo or Tesla or both will dominate.
Yeah, the Cruise GM relationship has been an interesting and rocky one for some time. Kyle Vogt, who's the founder of the company and took it through famously Y Combinator, actually, he left last November, and after he left, he put up a tweet saying, in case it was unclear before, it is clear now, GM are a bunch of dummies. So it's certainly a rocky history there. There is also Honda, which is an outside investor in Cruise. They put in about $800 million or $850 million into Cruise up till now. And they're basically, they had planned to launch a driverless ride-hail service in Japan in 2026, but they're saying they'll now be reassessing those plans. Anyway, kind of interesting step back from both these players at the same time. As you say, two big players left. Kind of interesting in the driverless space.
Moving on to the lightning round, and we have a bunch of stories on hardware. First up, largest AI data center in the world to be built in Northwest Alberta. So the name of this one is Wonder Valley, is what the largest AI data center will be called. And it will cost an estimated amount of $70 billion. Funded by a collaboration between the Municipal District of Greenview and O'Leary Ventures, which is led by Canadian millionaire Kevin O'Leary. So, total surprise to me, Jeremy. I'm guessing you have more to add on this.
Yeah, so this is insane. This is a huge story. I think this is, from an infrastructure standpoint, one of the biggest stories maybe of the quarter, if not the biggest story. So right now, just to situate you a little bit, people are struggling to find a spare gigawatt of power, right? So for context, so one H100 GPU very roughly will set you back about a kilowatt, right? It consumes a kilowatt of power. So if you want 1,000 H100 GPUs in your data center, you're going to need a megawatt, right? If you want a million H100 GPUs, you're going to want a gigawatt. So when we talk about a gigawatt of power, we're talking about, roughly speaking, order of magnitude, about 1 million NVIDIA H100s or the equivalent. And what we're now seeing is companies like Meta looking for that, that big 2 gigawatt cluster, right? The 1 gigawatt cluster, 1.5, stuff like that. There really is no plan right now to hit the 10 gigawatt cluster. In other words, the 10 million H100 equivalent cluster, that is going to require massive infrastructure build out. This is really noteworthy because, out of nowhere, Canada is relevant now for some reason, right? People have been looking all over North America for sites where you can build a large structure like this that can accommodate, really pushing the 10 million GPU threshold. And that's really what this means. Now, this project is going to unroll in phases, right? It's not going to all happen at once. Phase one is going to involve the first 1.4 gigawatts of power that's going to be brought online. They plan to bring on an additional 1 gigawatt of power each year afterwards. And again, very roughly, so 1 kilowatt is roughly 1 GPU, which is roughly 1 home. So you're thinking here about like the equivalent of powering an additional 1 million homes per year in this one little area. So that's pretty remarkable infrastructure build out. And the phase one build out, again, for that first 1.4 gigawatts is estimated to cost about 2.8 billion. So the vast majority is coming in later as they look to expand out. This is a big increase in Canada's just like baseline power generation capacity. It's about 150 gigawatts that Canada generates on an annual basis. So here we're looking to increase that by, well, what is that? By about 5%, if my math is right? Yeah, about 5%. That's a 5% increase just from this one site in available power. You need that, right? You need that to be able to power the cooling, the GPUs, the infrastructure, all that good stuff. But it makes this location like a really interesting geostrategic location. Like all of a sudden, it makes it relevant. Now, the timeline is tricky. Right. So what we're hearing here is we're hitting 7.5 gigawatts. Yes, that's the goal. The idea, though, is to have that online over the next 5 to 10 years. And so that's part of the challenge when you think about, especially if your AGI timelines are like, 2027, something like that. Then you may think of this as too little, too late, or at least the full 7.5. But still, the 1.4 gigawatts that will be coming online sooner may be relevant. So overall, really interesting. Why is this happening in Wonder Valley, Alberta, like in the middle of nowhere? Well, the answer is, number one, oil sands. So Alberta is a Canadian province that is known for having a lot of natural gas, thanks to the Alberta oil sands. Also, not mentioned in the article, but potentially quite helpful, it is cold as fuck up there. Cooling, potentially, it is very significantly kind of made easier by that. And then there's all kinds of pipeline infrastructure that's been developed there. Obviously, Alberta is the Texas of Canada. So they produce all the oil. People there they have like stampedes and shit. It's basically just Texas and Canada. And as a result, there are all kinds of pipelines that allow you to move resources around very easily. And so, and there's also a fiber optic network that's set up. So a lot of reasons why this is a really kind of promising site. And Kevin O'Leary of Shark Tank fame, right? If you've seen that, he is Canadian, but he is also a bit of a figure in the world of American, kind of testified in Congress about crypto, and he's done all kinds of stuff like that. So I think we'll be seeing more from this project. This is really, really interesting. One hopes that they will be engaging the appropriate national security assets to secure a site like this, because although it may not seem so today, if you buy into the premise that AI systems will be more and more weaponizable, this is going to be a national security asset, maybe first and foremost.
And on a very related, somewhat similar story, Meta has announced a 4 million square foot data center in Louisiana, which will cost about $10 billion, use 2 gigawatts of power, and will be used to train the Llama AI models. They say they have pledged to match the electricity use with 100% clean and renewable energy, and will be working with a company called Entergy to bring at least 1.5 gigawatts of new renewable energy to the grid. So, very much similar story, and one we've increasingly seen from all of these massive companies.
Yeah, 2 gigawatts again. I mean, this is a very significant amount of power, but pending regulatory approval, right? That important phrase. What I will say is, so right now, the new generators are expected to come online somewhere between 2028, 2029, pending regulatory approval. That probably is going to be a lot faster. Given the Trump administration's agenda on massive deregulation of American energy infrastructure, which, at least in my opinion, is a very important thing to do. I think even the Biden administration has a task force that they've set up to look into like how can we do some of this stuff. So expect the timeline associated at least with the regulatory hurdles to get cut back fairly significantly. That's something that I've actually been working on quite a bit as well. It's just like, how do you do this? How do you deregulate the energy piece to make sure that you can unlock American production and port it into the AI side in a way that's secure. Apparently there are 9 buildings, and there's going to be work that starts actually this month in December, with construction continuing through 2030. One of the interesting things about these sites is they're basically never finished, and once they're finished, they have a pretty short shelf life before they're no longer relevant because the next generation of hardware comes out. So yeah, and it's sort of like this living building, I guess. The overall development is known as Project Sucre. Sucre, actually, sucre is the French word for sugar. No idea why that. Well, I guess French because Louisiana, but there you have it. So they go into the details. There's like 2,200 megawatts worth of power coming from combined cycle combustion turbines, and there are 2 substations which have like crazy long backlogs. By the way, anyway, there's all kinds of stuff that they got to put together to get this stuff into shape. But it's going to be a big deal. Will be used to train the Llama models of the future, and Meta's on the map.
Yeah, fun fact, the 27th data center of Meta, and they also say this will be their largest to date. So setting some records at Meta. And one more story on this front. We have one from Google, and it is said that their future data centers will be built next to solar and wind farms. This is in relation to them partnering with Intersect Power and TPG Rise Climate. And they say that this will be kind of a source of being able to build data centers powered by on-site renewable energy that, according to them, is a first of its kind partnership. It's a $20 billion initiative. So curious to see how significant you think this is, Jeremy.
Yeah, I mean, the sourcing of power is kind of interesting. It's something that companies can be very showy with. Meta's done this a lot, where they'll build out some solar or wind thing. One of the big challenges with solar and wind is that the demands, especially when it comes to training models, are just like you need high throughput constantly of your power, right? High baseload power. And unfortunately, the wind isn't always blowing, the sun isn't always shining. So when you look at renewables, this is kind of a serious issue. So in practice, a lot of these data centers, while they're sometimes built next to or concurrently with a bunch of renewables, which these companies will do for the headline value. In practice, they draw down typically like natural gas or some sort of whatever spare nuclear power there is on the grid, stuff like that. So this is sort of an instance of that trend, and it'll be interesting to see if they can find ways to kind of solve for the variability in power generation there. But one of the things that this is also an instance of is the trend of companies going behind the meter. So basically, you'd be in front of the meter with your build, in which case you're drawing power from utilities, or you can go behind the meter, in which case you basically have an agreement with a power provider, like a power plant, and draw your power directly from them. That's really what's going on here. So Intersect Power in this case would own, develop, and operate the co-located plant, Anyway, so this is the agreement they have there. They also have an $800 million funding, Intersect Power does, from Google. So the kind of interconnection between power generation companies and big tech companies is really starting to become a thing right now. It is the case that AI is eating everything. And it's sort of interesting to see that you've got to become a power company, you got to become a hardware design firm, like all these things that it takes to scale AI to massive scale.
Yeah, it is quite interesting because obviously data centers has been a thing for a couple of decades. Google, Meta have massive data centers. They've dealt with sort of similar needs. Presumably, you do need a lot of power for data centers in general, but now with these AI data centers, it's much, much harder. And
a different beast.
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be an interesting book to be written just on that topic alone. But there's going to be a lot of books that need to be written about AI and what's going on right now, I guess. On to projects and open source. We had a bunch of stories in the previous episode, only one this time, and it is about Google again. They have released PalyGemma 2. These new PalyGemma models are vision language models. They have a 3 billion, 10 billion, and 28 billion variants with resolutions that vary as well. they have 9 pre-trained models with different size and resolution combinations as well. So yeah, we've seen these Gemma models come out from Google pretty regularly now, and this is seemingly getting some good benchmark performance for things like text detection, optical music score recognition, and radiography report generation. So not, kind of a big deal. VLMs are a little less prominent on the open source front, and this is a pretty significant VLM then.
Yeah, and then sort of 2 take-homes as well from the paper itself that sort of struck me as especially interesting. One of the findings was the larger the model that you have, the lower the optimal transfer learning rates were during training. So while they were training these models on a bunch of different tasks, they discovered this pattern about the learning rate. So the learning rate, by the way, is how much, as you change the model, right, by how much with every batch of data do you update your model weights, your model parameter values, right? Like if you take a big learning rate, that's like making big changes, a big step size in parameter space, right? Or a smaller learning rate is a smaller step size. A common way that this sort of takes shape is you'll tend to want like larger learning rates at the beginning of your training process because your weights initially are just complete garbage, so randomly initialized. And then over time, as your model gets better, you want to reduce the learning rate as you kind of get more and more refined, make smaller and smaller tweaks to your model as it learns. That's a bit of an intuition pump for this. So in this case, they were interested in kind of crossing over between different kinds of problems. And what they found was the larger the model was, the smaller you want your the smaller you want your learning rate to be. And this is kind of interesting. I mean, maybe some intuition for this is, if you have a large number of degrees of freedom, you can, you kind of tweak them maybe like it just allows you to make more nuanced movements, whereas you need to, make more significant movements when you have fewer degrees of freedom to learn the same thing, let's say. Kind of an interesting result. The other one was apparently increasing the resolution of images has a similar computational cost to increasing model size, which I found a little bit confusing at first. It actually does make sense. Ultimately, when you increase model size, the reason that it costs you more compute, obviously, is you have more parameters to dial in, right? So you just have more moving parts you need to refine every time you pass a batch of training data through, and more to compute the kind of forward pass as well. But so the issue here is if you get a bigger image, that will be associated with an encoding that has like just more moving parts as well, like more essentially like having more tokens that your model has to go over. And so sure, you may not be processing, using a larger model to process those inputs, but a larger image still involves more computations because it's essentially like having it's more data. Sounds pretty intuitive, at least when you put it that way. So you've got 2 different ways to increase the compute spend on your problem set. You can keep resolution fixed, but increase the model size, right? So you could go from 3 billion parameter model, 10 billion parameter model, or you could keep the model size fixed, but increase resolution. And depending on the regime you're in, it can actually be more efficient to do one or the other. They find that one is more or less compute optimal. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And again, more for the scaling literature that I'm sure we'll come back to later.
Yeah, this is one I found quite interesting. They found basically 3 groups of tasks. One group where the 2 were about similar in terms of the improvement they gave. This is actually the majority of the tasks. Things like segmentation, for instance, they found that making the model bigger or increasing resolution, both were pretty effective. But there were examples like text VQA, where the resolution really helped more, or doc VQA, for instance, which makes some sense, right? If you need to read text, probably higher resolution helps quite a bit. And then they do have other examples like science QA, for instance, where maybe because the model is bigger, it can better answer scientific questions and has more information in it. So certainly something I haven't seen before, and an interesting result from this paper. And speaking of papers, moving on to the research and advancement section, and we begin with a pretty cool paper, Training Large Language Models to Reason in a Continuous Latent Space. So in the reasoning paradigm in things like O1, what we've been seeing in general is often the way to reason is you literally tell the model sort of think through a set of steps that you need to do to solve this problem, then execute each of these steps. In some cases, you like review your answer and then iterate on your answer, see if there's anything wrong with it, etc. And all of that done is via outputting text, right? And feeding that text back to the model. So what this paper proposes, they have this new reasoning paradigm they call Coconut that takes the hidden state, the like non-text, the very kind of soup of just numbers that somehow encodes meaning in a large language models, and then feeds that into the model as the reasoning step instead of converting that hidden state into words previous to that. And so they call this continuous thought because these numbers are sort of a continuous representation of what will become a text, which is discrete. There's like a set of letters that you can choose from. So this approach has a lot of benefits. You can explore multiple reasoning paths. You don't need to decode, which is one of the very costly operations of LLMs, is going from representation to text requires decoding. So this certainly kind of augments your ability to do things like chain of thought reasoning. And they do show in experiments that this outperforms chain of thought in logical reasoning tasks with fewer tokens during inference.
Yeah, this is for my money. This is really the paper of the week by far, right? In fact, the story of the week by far. The implications here are really, really wide ranging, and I think this is going to be rolled into, if it's not already, frankly, it's going to be rolled into training schemes that we see for agentic systems very soon. So, basic frame here is, your text-based reasoning that you see, as you said, with chain of thought, right? Where the model will explicitly write out its own chain of thought, and it will use its own chain of thought to help guide it towards more optimal solutions. That approach is not ideal. It's not the best way for these models to reason. Most tokens are used for things like textual coherence, grammar, things like that, not essential for reasoning. By contrast, you have some tokens that really require a lot of thought and complex planning, right? Think about, for example, a sentence like the best next move on this chessboard is blank, right? That blank, like you'd want your model to really think hard about what that next piece is, that next token is. But with current approaches, you're basically spending the same amount of compute on that word as you are on the word the, right? Which is not terribly informative. So that's kind of an interesting intuition pump for why you might want another approach, an approach that doesn't involve explicitly laying things out in plain English. So what they are doing is, so if you imagine your transformer, you feed in your prompt, your input tokens, and those prompts get turned into embeddings, basically just a list of numbers that represents that initial prompt. And then that list of numbers gets chewed on, gets multiplied essentially by matrices all the way down until you get a final sort of vector, a final list of numbers that's been chewed on a whole hell of a lot. And that final list of numbers, the last hidden state, is what gets decoded into an output token normally, an actual word that you can interpret and understand. But what they're going to do here is they'll take that last hidden state, instead of decoding it, they're going to turn around and feed it back in to the model at the very bottom in the position of the input embedding, and have it go through yet again. And what they're doing is essentially causing the model to chew on that token again. That's one way of thinking about it, essentially. But the way they're going to train the model is by using a chain of thought data set. So what they do is they start by saying, okay, imagine you have a chain of thought that has like, okay, I'll start by solving this problem. Step 1, I'm going to do this. Step 2, I'm going to do this. Step 3, I'm going to do this, and so on. And what they're going to do in the training process is they'll use that expensive to collect data set, that chain of thought data set, and they'll start by kind of causing. Sorry, let me take a step back. When this model generates its last hidden state, right? When you finish propagating your data through, you have your last hidden state. Normally, you would decode to an output token, but now you're again feeding it back into the bottom of the model. Well, you still need a token that gets spat out just for your model to be coherent, anyway, to respect the fact that it's an autoregressive model. And so what they're going to do is they're going to essentially put a thought token in that position as the output. Now, you can essentially decide how many thought tokens you want between your input and your answer. And that allows you to control how much inference time compute in a very interesting and fairly objective way your model is investing in generating that answer. So number one, that's a really interesting way of quantifying semi-objectively the amount of compute that goes into your inference time strategy, right? So we haven't seen stuff like that before. I think it's exciting for that reason in part. But the other thing that makes it interesting is the training process. So that thought token that you're spitting out, what they do is they'll take their data set, their chain of thought data set, and they'll kind of blank out one step at first, say step one, and they'll try to get the model to just replace it with a thought token, so not actually spit out the step one reasoning, and then but they'll keep step two and step three. They'll allow it to reason in plain English for those steps, and then in a later round of training, they'll replace step two and then step three. So sort of this iterative process where you're getting the model to reason in latent space for more and more of the problem set. And that allows you to kind of control get the model to converge in a more robust way. Last thing I'm going to say, there's so much. If you're going to read a paper cover to cover this quarter, make it this paper. This is really a really, really important paper. One of the key things that they find is when the model, in traditional chain of thought, when the model is about to generate a token, right, one piece of text, the thing that gets decoded, the last hidden state that actually gets decoded into that token, actually contains, it encodes a probability distribution over tokens. When you force it to actually decode to give you one token, you're kind of telling it look, I know that you think the solution could start with any one of a dozen different possible tokens. I'm going to force you to just pick the one you think is most likely. Now, in that process, what you're really doing is you're destroying all of the potentialities that the model was considering exploring. It was essentially in the state where, as you might be, if you're thinking about solving a problem, you might be my approach might involve this strategy or this strategy, I'm not really sure which one to try first, but then it's basically forcing you to go, okay, I'm going to commit to this one. And once it actually decodes that token in a conventional chain of thought strategy, then it cuts off all those other possibilities. It ceases essentially to explore the full space of possible solutions, and it gets locked in. And then in the next stage, when it's kind of going through this process of producing the sort of next token in the sequence, again, it's gonna go, okay, well, sure, I'm locked in on the first token, but for the second token, there's a wide range of potentialities I could explore. Again, it'll be forced to lock in. This is really interesting because by keeping the reasoning in that latent space, by keeping the last hidden state and not decoding it, you're allowing the model to simultaneously consider and explore a bunch of different strategies. All the different possibilities that come from token one then get compounded with the possibilities that come from token two without being interrupted by the sort of collapse of the solution into one possible mode. And there are all kinds of implications for that. They do a great analysis of how you can actually then view this process as a sort of tree, right? So a tree, a mesh, a network of possible solutions that are being explored at the same time, and how you can use that in turn to measure how effective the reasoning is. This is a paper to read. This is a paper to look into deeply. It is, by the way, it's kind of interesting. They use a pre-trained version, of GPT-2 as the base model for all these experiments. There are a whole bunch of reasons I think that we should suspect that this will greatly improve with scaling. GPT-2 obviously is a tiny model, but the kinds of things that we're looking at here, exploring many different paths, right? Things that look like chain of thought. These are all things that we've seen improve a lot with scale. So I think anyway, I think this is a really, really big deal for a lot of reasons, and I wish we could do a whole episode on it.
Yeah, and if there's even more to say, there's quite a lot going on here. So an interesting kind of thing going on, for instance, is ideally the model could just be trained. If you just do optimization, it will happen that it will be able to do, I guess a similar notion is kind of recursive models, right? Where
You feed the output back to itself and it gets better every time. In practice, I did find that you need to do curriculum training. So there's a special training regime that they do this. There's training with kind of a variety of objectives over time. They compare actually also to another paper called ICOT, which is internalized chain of thought reasoning. So there's kind of another paradigm, which is from earlier this year, where instead of doing this, which is essentially taking chain of thought reasoning and training a model to do chain of thought reasoning well in this continuous space, you can instead try to optimize the model to sort of do the chain of thought reasoning implicitly. You train it to be able to output the same answer it would give if it had done chain of thought reasoning without outputting and decoding into that chain of thought. That also works pretty well, as you might expect. And that is one thing that you could actually combine here. And they say that this is a future avenue of research, is maybe you can do both. You could optimize the model to implicitly do chain of thought reasoning and also empower it to do, I guess, additional continuous chain of thought reasoning. And they do show that this technique works better than implicit chain of thought reasoning. But they're both pretty strong techniques here. Lots we could go into, but probably we don't have too much time, so we'll have to leave it at that. Next paper, also a pretty notable one, I think, from this past week. The title is An Evolved Universal Transformer Memory. This is from Asana, a startup that has, made with some waves. Sakana. Oh man, I'm showing my tool set that I used in my engineering day to day. Sakana, yes, which started by some researchers that were quite experienced in the kind of evolution area of optimization, where you don't do gradient descent. You instead do this non-differentiable method optimization. I guess I don't know if it's too technical, but basically you can optimize for things that you can't with the usual way that neural nets are trained. And they find that this is an example where you can train this neural attention memory model that is optimized to decide which tokens are worth keeping around, essentially in long context use cases where you have very long inputs, and you need to essentially do a sort of memory, a working memory type thing within the transformer. You can, usually this is sort of trained implicitly, I suppose, by just doing the usual training with long context inputs. Here, they optimize this technique to focus on the most relevant information for individual layers throughout the neural net. And that improves performance across various long context benchmarks. And this can be combined with any existing large language model kind of training model.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach, and definitely more inductive priors that they're adding into the stack here. So basically, this is like your attention layers are going to look at your input and determine, okay, which tokens should I base my answer on the most, or should the model base answer on the most, assign a higher attention value to those, and move on. And there are a couple of issues with that. Like, first of all, not all, like, you end up having these massive KV caches, basically the caches that hold the data that you need to calculate those attention values, and then the attention values themselves. And the problem is, not all tokens are equally important. Some of them can be thrown away, and you're just taking up a whole ton of memory with a bunch of useless stuff that you don't really need to retain. And so the question here that we're trying to answer is, can we build a model that selectively determines and throws away a kind of unnecessary token data in the KV cache? And that's really interesting. They're going to do this with an ancillary model. They're going to use an evolutionary computing approach. It's a really kind of interesting game plan. The general intuition behind the workflow here is, in part, they're going to use Fourier analysis. So this is essentially the study of, let's say, decomposing signals into wave-like patterns. What this is often used to do is just to identify repeating periodic patterns that appear in some input. They're going to apply that to the attention values in the input sequence that you're analyzing. And so you might wonder, like, hey, well, why do that? Well, just because there are patterns that can appear in those attention values, and those patterns make the attention vector more compressible, right? Anytime there's a pattern, you can compress a thing, because it means that, like, a pattern by definition is a repetitive thing where if you have just part of it, you can reconstruct the rest. So this is exactly the strategy they'll use. And it's all about figuring out, how can I compress this to throw away data that I don't need, based on, the token's frequency patterns, how often it's being used, how it's being used, the token's position in the sequence, how it relates to other tokens through backward attention, and that's its own separate thing. So typically when you train an autoregressive model, what you're doing is you're looking. So the current token that you're trying to predict on, you get to base that prediction on all the tokens that come before, but not on the tokens that come after. And you actually do know what those tokens will be, because you're typically, during training, pulling this from an existing sentence that has been completed. But the problem is that often the tokens that come ahead actually do have relevance to the current prediction. So they set up a backward attention mechanism that lets earlier tokens look at later ones and get information from those as part of this whole scheme. So anyway, it is really interesting. I think it's another one of those papers that you'll want to dive into if this is your space of interest. But another way to tack on more complexity. There's more work for the compute to do, and I think that's a very promising path.
Right, and it's also an interesting kind of paradigm in that you're sort of training this additional module on top of a pre-trained model. So there's kind of a base model. You can take Llama 3, for instance, and train this whole other thing that kind of operates kind of independently or kind of adds itself to the middle in a way. And if you do that, it can sort of be transferred onto other models, other large language models, without retraining on them. And there's various benchmark numbers they give. The highlight is on very long context benchmarks like Infinite Bench. It does appear to help a lot. And I think this is one of these areas where there's been a lot of progress, but it isn't quite solved per se, these kind of long context strings. So this could be very significant. On to the lightning round. We begin with Apollo SGD-like memory, ADAM-W level performance. So, a bit technical, but we'll try to keep it understandable, I suppose. So, when you train a neural net, you're basically doing gradient descent. And there's a specific version of stochastic gradient descent where you're sampling parts of the data. That's the fundamental way to optimize a neural net. You compute the gradients that you get from the errors on the outputs, and you backpropagate it. Well, there is a bunch of other detail you can add on top of that with optimization. And ADAM is usually the optimizer people use. What that optimizer does is add a sort of memory over recent optimization rounds. And that allows you to know what amount of how big a step you should take with learning rate across different weights. Now, the issue with that makes you perform better, but that requires you to now store that information of previous backpropagation rounds that compute the updated learning rate. So the gist of this paper is, as per the title, SGD-like memory, ADAM-W level performance, is they have this approximated gradient scaling for memory efficient LLM optimization, Apollo, which approximates the learning rate scaling using some fancy stuff that allows you to get away from all the storage required by ADAM. I think that's a pretty good gist of it.
Yeah. So I think there's a whole set of papers in this category recently, and I think for deeply, deeply strategic reasons, right? The big question right now is, how do we scale AI training across a large number of geographically distributed training clusters? The reason is it's really hard to find a concentration of power, of energy in one geographic location that will allow you to build one data center that's like a gigawatt or a 10 gigawatt data center, as we discussed earlier. So as a result, there's all this interest in how can we set up distributed training schemes that require less data moving around different data centers across long distances. And so now essentially we're interested in, can we compress, can we reduce the amount of data that we need to pass back and forth across a system like this? So enter the problem, right? Atom W. This is the optimizer that's typically used today to train models at scale, or one of them. And the way this works is, for a given parameter in your neural network, the training scheme will remember, okay, there's this much of an update that we need to make to this parameter now. How much of an update did I have to make last time and the time before? And if all those updates kind of point in the same direction, it suggests there's a lot of momentum heading in that direction. So, if they always said increase this parameter value very significantly, well, maybe that means you ought to really ratchet up that parameter value quite significantly. Apply a bigger learning rate, essentially, right? Move it, make the update bigger, right? And then conversely, if you find there's less momentum. That's the basic premise, but I just listed 3 different numbers that you need to calculate to remember for that particular parameter, right? You got to remember the current value, the current update. You got to remember the update last round and the round before that, right? So together, that's like 3 times the model's size in optimizer state memory that you need to keep and pass around and all that stuff. So the goal here is going to be to say, okay, well, can I just focus instead of literally every single parameter in my model? Could I, for example, zero in on one chunk of the network, what they call one channel, essentially groups of parameters that tend to behave similarly, and just have a single scaling factor, single learning rate, if you will, for that chunk of parameters. And that way, I can divide the amount of data I need to remember by the number of parameters in that chunk. And they're going to show that, in fact, does work. It also applies to entire layers of the transformer. They do that in TensorWise compression, which they apply here. And anyway, so this is it's really, really interesting. The way they do this is kind of trippy. We're not going to get into it. This thing called random projections is used, which, by the way, Andre, mathematically, this still blows my mind. You have a random matrix, you multiply it by the parameter update matrix, and you get out, you can get a smaller matrix depending on the dimensions of the random matrix. But that smaller matrix will preserve some critical mathematical properties of the original matrix, even though it's multiplying a randomish. It doesn't matter. It's the Johnson-Linden-Strauss lemma, this is the first time I ran into it. Holy shit, makes no sense. Random projections, what the fuck? Cool paper, nice work. That's it.
Yeah, fun fact, there's a whole area of research, or there at least was, where you could do random projections for the hidden layers in a neural net. Usually you update all the weights in your neural net. Well, you can actually just randomly initialize a bunch of them, and that still helps you, which is another one of these properties that's really curious. And real quick, I do like to do this every once in a while. This paper is a collaboration between the University of Texas at Austin and AI at Meta. So I think there's been a lot of worry in recent years about universities not kind of being able to do useful research, essentially, because you do need these crazy amounts of compute. Often it's been the case that people have interned at these large organizations like Meta or Google and did some work there, originating from grad school. I think this is another example where even if you don't have massive compute necessarily, or you have limited compute, you can do some really good, useful research. Alrighty, one last paper or research work. This is from Anthropic, and they call it Clio, a system for privacy-preserving insights into real-world AI use. So the idea here is you have a bunch of people using Claude. Presumably, you want to be able to understand how they are using it. Like, are they using it for coding? Are you using it for learning, et cetera, et cetera? So this is essentially a framework that automates anonymizing and aggregating data creating topic clusters from all these conversations without exposing any private information. Because if you're looking at conversations, right, someone might be saying, oh, this is some medical information. You do not want to be able to expose that as a specific thing that people are talking about. So this is a technique to discover usage patterns. They revealed some interesting things, like, for instance, over 10% of conversations are focused on web and mobile application development. Educational purposes and business strategy discussions are also prominent, with 7 and 6% respectively. And I think there's a lot of interesting, this is one of these things that you presumably definitely need as an LLM developer to know what people are using your LLM for. And this would allow Anthropic to fine-tune their model effectively, and also would improve safety measures by identifying potential policy violations and coordinate misuse. All right, moving right along, we have policy and safety next. The first story is a little bit of a dark one, but I do think important to cover. It has to do with Character.ai, which, quick recap, Character.ai is a chatbot platform, a very popular one where people spend a lot of time talking to artificial intelligence characters. In recent months, they've had 2 controversies and lawsuits. One where a teenager, seemingly or supposedly due to some of the influence of Character.ai, this teenager was very obsessed with Character.ai. Well, they ended their own life, which was quite tragic. The parents say that Character.ai was partially at fault. There was another incident also with harmful behavior that Character.ai may have augmented. So Character.ai is now stepping up teen safety. They are introducing a special model, a teen model, that aims to guide interactions away from sensitive content and reduce the likelihood of users encouraging or prompting inappropriate responses. There are also classifiers to filter sensitive content and improve detection and intervention for user inputs. And I think this is one of these things that specifically for Character.ai is very important, but also in general, as you see more and more people interacting with AI more and more, and interacting more and more kind of intimate ways or human-like ways, it's inevitable that we'll see more of stories of the sort, where a person was maybe erroneously encouraged to do something bad, or maybe erroneously, motivated in a way that probably shouldn't have been the case. This is another kind of area of AI safety that maybe hasn't been explored too much, like group psychological influence that AI models may have over people. So a very real example of that already happening in the real world, and this company particularly needing to tackle that.
Yeah. And I mean, this is one of those areas where you might expect pretty soon some regulation. I would imagine, it's something that, congressmen have kids who use these tools. And so I'd expect them to be fairly sensitive to this. There's also just the challenge of looking at children as, how would you put it? Like canaries in a coal mine for adults, right? Like, you're talking about autistic teens now, but as these systems get more persuasive, we have some really fundamental questions to ask about where the interaction of any human being and an AI system goes, and in a world where you can be convinced of a lot of things by the chatbots you interact with, that there's a long tail of humans at various stages of life who might find this stuff really compelling and be induced to do bad things as a result. So really hard to know, where this all goes, but it's at least, good that there's now pressure to move in this direction. There is a notice that says you have to be 13 or older to create an account on Character.ai. And then they do say users under 18 receive a different experience on the platform, including a more conservative model to reduce the likelihood of encountering sensitive or suggestive content. But age is self-reported. So, I think it's an open question as to how effective those sorts of measures are. Going beyond that does require, though, thorny things like not necessarily proof of identity, but like proof of age, at least at a more compelling level. And so there are privacy implications there too. It's just a really hard problem to solve. Facebook ran into this early on when they were trying to prevent people from using it under 13 years of age, and other platforms have too. So just challenging problem and unfortunate reality of the current state of chatbots.
There's a bit more here as well worth mentioning. So this is an issue partially of potential kind of encouragement of bad behavior. Another aspect of this is addiction, where in a lot of cases, especially in the cases here, the teenagers were, you could say, obsessed or you could say addicted to talking to these AI characters, spending hours and hours talking to them. And this announcement from Character AI is coming after, almost immediately after another lawsuit being filed. So this was filed this past week. As you said, in this one, there was a case of a 17-year-old boy with high functioning autism who was spending a very long, very big amount of time talking to Character AI, supposedly was encouraged to be violent towards his family, his parents, things like that. So another aspect of this is people might really get addicted and seek companionship and social support from AI in a way that isn't healthy. Another aspect that these sorts of platforms really need to start tackling, and as you say, regulation might need to address as well. And next story, now moving to policy. The title is What Trump's New AI and Crypto Czar David Sacks Means for the Tech Industry. So as that implies, there is the news that there is going to be an AI and crypto czar, David Sacks. This is a bit of a weird one. This is not sort of an official role. There's not going to be a Senate confirmation for this appointment. It's going to be a part-time role. He's going to keep his business position as someone who works in venture capital. David Sacks, for the record, is a pretty notable person, hosts a very, very popular podcast called All In. One of the hosts of that podcast has been a big supporter of Trump. So what would this mean? Presumably, of course, very business-friendly approaches to AI and crypto, a very pro-industry approach. Also has expressed support of integrating AI into national security and defense. And with regards to crypto, just quickly mentioning it, it is also going to be the case that there's going to be relatively little regulation, let's say.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell what the left and right bounds of this position are going to be. Like, it's it doesn't fit the standard mold. And if you look at, for example, Department of Commerce, they have a workflow that's just completely different from, and it doesn't have a way to interface with this position. And so you might naturally wonder, like, what is going on? I mean, this article speculates, that it may be more about relationships than kind of conventional formal channels of influence over departments and agencies. But at the end of the day, this does mean that Sacks is going to be in the White House and influential, certainly on AI and crypto. One of the questions too is how far does this extend into the national security sphere? I think that is probably the core question here. It seems very much as if, especially given the remit is AI and crypto, this seems like a very industry-focused thing when you start to think about, okay, but what about the national security risks associated with the technology? Not that he won't be a voice, he presumably will be, but there are probably going to be other voices at the table as well. And finally, I mean, it highlights, as the article points out and is quite apparent to people following the space, there are two different camps in the White House right now. You've got the Mark Andreessen, sort of like David Sacks camp of, hey, let's get AI developed and basically, who cares to some degree about the risks, or that's a bit of a caricature, but more like, the benefits far outweigh the risks and let's forge ahead. And then you've got Elon, who obviously has talked a lot about the risks from weaponization, loss of control, that sort of thing. So how exactly that all shakes out, that's going to be an interesting thing to track. And the David Sacks appointment is, again, really hard to kind of pin down. And that may be the idea. Trump may just want him around to offer input. I do notice his maximum number of working days a year is set to 130 because he will be a special government employee, so part-time. And there's some controversy flagged here that doesn't require him to divest or publicly disclose his assets, which leads to potential conflicts of interest and things like that. So anyway, kind of interesting one to watch, and we'll see. I mean, I think a lot of this has yet to take shape, and the administration probably doesn't even know what his role will be. They'll just sort of play it out and see how, where the influence ends up lying in practice.
On to the lightning round. Now moving on to some research. We have a paper, Frontier AI Systems Have Surpassed the Self-Replicating Red Line. So self-replication is one of these concerns with regards to advanced AI. Essentially, if you have an advanced AI model, well, maybe you can keep it under lock and key, can keep it controlled, not allow it to access the web, etc. But if the AI model is able to self-replicate, to make a copy of itself somewhere else and sort of unleash itself onto a world, that could lead to bad things if a model then decides that it should do something opposed to human interests. So this is one of the kind of common things to watch out for, that Anthropic, for instance, evaluates continuously whether the new generations of models are capable of it. In this paper, they show that in 50 and 90% of experimental trials with several models, Llama 3170B and Alibaba's Qwen 2572B, they are able to succeed in creating a live and separate copy of itself, respectively. What this means in practice is they are able to generate the code necessary to deploy another instance of themselves, which in a way isn't necessarily surprising. I think if you've been working with these things, if you are meant to do it, you sort of are allowed to self-replicate. For instance, this is the sort of engineering that the advanced models should be kind of getting to a point of being able to do. So, not entirely surprising, but definitely worth taking a note of. And Jeremy, I'm sure you have more to say on this.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this paper circulating around quite a bit. There's, to your point, I think there's a bit of overhype on what exactly. I don't want to call it overhype. I mean, it all depends on what you mean by self-replication. One of the first questions you might have looking at this, if you're tracking the space, you might remember the company Meter that does these self-replication evals for OpenAI and other companies in the space. And they've consistently found with models to date that, yes, they are getting better, in some cases much better at doing self-replication type stuff, but they're not really able to do it well. And we're definitely not there quite yet. So the question then becomes, what is the difference between this and the Meter evals? And it comes down really to how you define self-replication. Meter tends to look at deep replication that includes like model weights and architecture. This one is more about, as you said, copying files, launching processes, like the engineering side of getting this done, which can still get you a working system. And to the extent that you care more about system automation than true deep AI replication, then the threat model actually kind of holds. But certainly, there are other differences, like the Meter evals tend to involve a more constrained environment, kind of less access to things like system commands, file operations, third-party tools, and they really worked a lot on their their agent framework, the kind of wrapper that sits around the model to help turn it into an agent. Meter, at least in its most recent test, hasn't been able to do that much work on that piece. So I think it is notable. It's also mixed with, especially some of their more concrete scenarios, do come with a lot of kind of hard coded rather than native AI behavior. Well, they deliberately prompt the model to do certain things, and then they sort of marvel at the fact that it does those things successfully, mind you, which is good. Not good, but which is a legitimate finding. But it remains true that this is with deliberate prompting. So essentially, comes down to which threat models you're concerned with the most. If you're concerned with sort of autonomous AI-driven kind of independent urge to self-replicate, this won't scratch that itch. That That's a power-seeking measurement. That's not what's being measured here. What they're really looking at more is the capability dimension itself. And that is, if you're concerned with this general threat model, this might be a modest update, but I don't think it's anything that, as you said, anyone's going to really be surprised by, the capabilities at least. Given that we've seen these models do similar things in other contexts.
That's right. Yeah. So it's one of these cases where you really should read beyond the headline, which sounds a bit serious, to the details. Next up, getting back to geopolitics, as we often touch on, the title of the article is Chip War. China launches antitrust probe into NVIDIA in a sign of escalation. So there's an investigation that focuses on NVIDIA's $6.9 billion acquisition of Mellanox Technologies, with the claim that this might be violating China's anti-monopoly laws. Monopoly being, in case anyone doesn't know, probably most people know, but if you're a dominant player in some industry and are stifling competition. So this deal happened back in 2020. It was approved by China, but required NVIDIA to supply products to China under fair and non-discriminatory terms. And as you might expect, this could be an aggressive measure by China to retaliate against US policies. And NVIDIA's stock did take a hit, 1.8% drop following the announcement of the investigation, not even anything regulatory happening yet.
Yeah, I think this is pretty standard CCP response to export controls hitting. Like we've just had a tightening of export controls around, as we talked about last week, high bandwidth memory, some lithography equipment exports as well, things like that. So, China going tit for tat. This is aligned as well with their restriction of exports for rare earth minerals. So they're really looking for all the ways that they can try to frustrate American companies and American AI efforts. This is all part of the reason why the solution to this was always, it wouldn't have been politically feasible, but the solution to this was always clamp down once hard and decisively on Chinese exports, back in 2019, 2020. Again, not politically feasible. But what we're doing is we're playing this kind of losing game of whack-a-mole where you try to patch up one gap and then another appears. And then every time you incrementally increase the threshold of export controls, now the CCP is going to do a retaliatory action. So if you did something decisive early enough, who knows, maybe you could have obviated some of this. Then again, China has less to lose in that context. So that's really what we're getting at. The export controls are actually really starting to work. We've seen a number of indications of that. And this is now really getting under their skin. They're also trying to posture ahead of the Trump administration to try to make it seem like, if you come in with stronger sanctions, we're going to bite back even harder type thing. Non-negligible concern, especially on rare earth exports. The U.S. is just terribly positioned on that stuff. And that's just a self-inflicted wound. But it can be fixed with the right deregulation, and it can be fixed with, the right investment and focus. But this is just, sort of standard fare and something that I'm sure the administration actually expected going in, stuff like this.
And speaking of export regulation, the next story is about another territory that's been sort of, let's say, unclear, a bit in a gray zone. And it seems the US has cleared export of advanced AI chips to the UAE under a Microsoft deal. So there is a Microsoft-operated facility in the UAE as part of a partnership with G42. We've covered that previously. We've made some big investments in there. Microsoft invested $1.5 billion in G42. That gives it a minority stake in a board seat. So they're pretty deeply invested in this organization as part of the UAE. And it has been a question mark as to what the response of the US government will be, as there are also some potential Chinese ties of G42. And so it seems that there is the export license. It does require Microsoft to restrict access of this UAE facility from personnel associated with nations under the US arms embargoes or under the US entity list. So essentially, you get the export license, but you got to be still respecting the restrictions that have been placed on China.
Yeah, apparently the license now that's been approved requires Microsoft to prevent access to its facility in the UAE by personnel who are from nations under U.S. arms embargoes or who are on the entity list, the famous BIS, Bureau of Industry and Security's entity list of the Commerce Department. This is the list that contains companies like Huawei, like YMTC, some of the big players in the Chinese ecosystem, and frankly should contain a lot more. And frankly should probably be a white list and not a black list, but I digress. So right now, all these requirements are being added to essentially prevent this stuff. It's kind of interesting, right? Like this starts to, if you know the kind of world of policy and arms control policy, it starts to vibe a little bit like a shade of ITAR. Like, they're starting to think about the next. So ITAR is this sort of is counterproliferation essentially policy. It says, if I give you a special technology, you are only allowed to pass it on to other people who are ITAR approved, if you will. And if you fail that, then you're in big trouble, right? So the idea here is that they're sort of pass this forward, but say, hey, you can't feed this forward to people who are on the entity list who aren't screened in. It's kind of interesting because it is a step in that direction, which would. I think one of the things that you need to look at from a national security standpoint is officially classifying AI as a dual use technology under ITAR, more advanced AI systems, not the kind of general purpose ones that we have lying around today. So anyway, all very interesting. The restrictions cover people physically in China, the Chinese government, or personnel working for any organization headquartered in China. So clear what is in the kind of target zone here in terms of G42.
And on to the last story, and moving back to the US, the White House has created a task force on AI data center infrastructure, as Jeremy, you mentioned earlier in this episode. So this is going to coordinate policy across the government and maintain a US leadership in AI technology is the party line. So this will involve, of course, the Department of Energy. They will create an AI data center engagement team and share resources on repurposing closed coal sites, apparently. The U.S. Arms Corps of Engineering will also identify permits to expedite AI data center construction. And there's also some stuff here on industry exports. Seems very much in line with what is needed to expedite and enable these very, very complicated data center constructions to take place.
Yeah, the big challenge here is that it is a whole of government issue. So you have to have coordination across the Department of Energy, Department of Commerce. You've got national security, increasing national security considerations to be brought in. And so what you're essentially seeing is the government recognizing that and saying like, oh crap, so the National Economic Council, National Security Council, by the way, these are councils that advise the president on the issues of the day. So the National Security Council, you have a bunch of usually they're fairly prominent national security people, and then the staff does a lot of the key work, the national security, the NSC staff. And so essentially all kind of coordinated together at the White House level to solve problems like, hey, how do we deregulate in a strategic way? Presumably, the Trump administration is going to be more aggressive than this even, especially on environmental regulation, deregulation, things like that, things that are blocking the development of these new builds, the development of new power plants, the sort of national security vetting of sites and things like that. So I think it's interesting and noteworthy that we're now at the point where this is becoming a White House priority, and a lot of talk as well about getting the military in various forms to support here. And this is, as you say, the Army Corps of Engineers, right? So now the DoD is involved. Very wide ranging effort here.
And that is it for this episode. Wound up with a bit of a long one. Lots to talk about this last week. Thank you so much for listening, especially if you did make it to the very end and are listening to me now. That's impressive. You made it through an entire episode. As you probably already know, you can find the links to articles in the episode description. You can also go to lastweekinai.com for that, or lastweekin.ai, where you get the text newsletter. As always, we appreciate any comments, any feedback. We try and read those, even if we don't mention them on the show. And we do appreciate reviews. Getting those 5 stars always feels nice. But more than anything, we do appreciate people listening. So do make sure to keep tuning in and enjoy the AI outro song.
Gather round, it's time to cheer. Episode 93 is here. Open eye, sail ship, master, what a sight. Gemini 2 shines bright in the starry night. AI agents surf the web, browsing also free. New discoveries and joys in the world of AI. This festive season, let's raise a joyous cry. Stories and foretells of progress made in the AI realm where wonders cascade. Ship mass brings joy to coders and breeze of light. AI in every corner, changing day to night. Gemini 2's brilliance lights up the tech sphere. With every leap and bound, future grows here. AI agents learning with each click and scroll. They're weaving new narratives, bringing us all. AI agents surf the web, browsing also free. New discoveries and joys in the world of AI. This festive season, let's raise a joyous cry. For the world to see, sing a lullaby for our digital nights, steering the path with luminous insights. Let the joy of progress ring throughout the land. Hey, I'm thriving like a well-rehearsed band.